Hello everybody, my name is Jeffrey Height, and I'm here today to give a brief presentation on confined spaces. First, a little history about myself. I'm a paramedic who works on the North Slope of Alaska. I'm also a full-time student at the University of Alaska studying occupational health and safety. So some of the reasons why I think this presentation is important to us all is it teaches us how to define a confined space. It also teaches us how to classify a confined space as permit or non-permit required. It shows us some of the important resources necessary before we enter a space and some of the hazards that could potentially be waiting for us within the space. And then finally, we're going to discuss some of the golden rules of what to do, what not to do in the event that someone goes down within a confined space. So to start off with, I'd like to go around and figure out how many of you have actually had experience with confined spaces. Okay? So those of you who haven't, I'd like for you to sit back for a moment, picture a space that when you walked up to it, in your mind, it could potentially be a dangerous space, and also you would define it as a confined space. Now, hold that thought, and we're going to move into the next slide, and we're going to see how well that matched up to some of the other agencies' predictions. So, OSHA and a lot of other agencies define a confined space as a space large enough that an employee can fit their entire body inside of the space. They also say that the space must not be designed for continuous human occupancy, and that the space has limited or restricted means of entry or exit. Well, what does that mean to us? Well, first off, it means we're not going to go in there and sleep for the night. You know, this is a space that's designed for work processes or work to be done on that space. So we're not going to go in there, we're not going to cook dinner, we're not hanging out for any other reason other than the work assignment. So what are some examples that OSHA gives us? Well, they give us examples like tanks, grain silos, pits, process vessels. Now, earlier I asked you what a confined space was in your mind. What did you picture when you saw a confined space? And how did that match up? How about some examples? Okay, perfect. Those are all great answers. Well, next we're going to look into whether or not those spaces could be defined as permit required or non-permit required. OSHA also says that a non-permit required confined space is a space that is non-hazardous for work. Well, what does this mean? This means that a hazard doesn't exist, and the hazard doesn't have a potential to exist in the future while work is taking place. Now, we all can sit back and say that we don't think that the hazard can exist once we get the work started. But things can change. And so what this means is you may be able to start the work out at non-permit, but once conditions change, work needs to stop, you need to exit, and reevaluate the situation. Now, for a permit-required confined space, it meets all the rules of a confined space and a non-permit confined space, but it has some extras. And what those extras are, they're hazards. Usually, they come in the form of known hazards, either toxic gas, oxygen deficiencies, mechanical hazards in place that could crush you, hurt you, and also hazards such as potential fire hazards and electrical hazards. So, I'd like for you all to think of some of the hazards that may exist in the space that you defined earlier. And keep that in your mind, and let's go to the next page and see if it matches up. Some of the hazards listed here, for example, are oxygen deficiency or high oxygen concentration, usually under 19.5 or over 23.5. These concentrations can either cause hypoxia, cause you to get sluggish and eventually go unconscious and further decrease until you eventually die, or they could be a huge flammable hazard. Any ignition source at all over 23.5 and you're potentially going to have an explosion, fire that engulfs you and hurts people on the outside. Next, we have toxic materials like benzene or hydrogen sulfide. We have combustibles. We have mechanical parts. We have electricity. All those things could potentially harm us, hurt us inside the confined space. Now, why are these hazards so dangerous? Well, to start off with, the confined space, again, is limited on the means of exit. Well, if you have a hazard that's in there affecting you, you're already going to have a slow response to get out of that tank. And that's not to mention if that hazard is a toxin, something that's slowly degrading your sense of judgment to the point where you can't get out of that space in an effective amount of time. Also, we look at things that are immediately dangerous to life and health, things that when you go inside can hit you so fast that you don't even recognize that it's happening, and then you're down. You're on the ground, and there's nothing anyone can do for you. Those are all reasons why these hazards are dangerous, and we need to be prepared for them. Next, what are the necessary personnel for entering a confined space? Well, you need a rescue team on site, especially if the tank is hazardous. And then you also need an entry supervisor. This is usually the person that's going to go around, get the permits, set up the process for evaluating the tank, monitoring, setting all the pieces in place for the work to be done. You have the attendant. This is the guy that's sitting outside monitoring the work that's taking place and making sure that the entrant, the last one, is safe inside, maintaining communication, and nothing has changed or happened to them. So steps for entry, some of the steps. You need to locate, identify the work. You need to decide whether it's hazardous, non-hazardous, get your permit, come back, assess the space again, make sure nothing has changed. If it's not permit, go ahead and start the work and monitor for additional changes later on. If it is hazardous, you need to mitigate the hazards and get them within the parameters that OSHA defines and their standards. Don't be a victim. So the golden rule is, when you're inside, there's always potential that something can arise, conditions can change. Don't sit in there, don't end up being a victim. Don't be the person that stays in, ignores the changes, and thinks, oh, well, everything's going to be okay. Things change, stop the job, get out, reassess. Also, if you are inside the tank, if someone goes down, and it's not reasonable for you to grab that person and get out immediately, you have to rely and trust upon your rescue personnel. So don't make yourself a victim going in for somebody that you're not qualified to get or can't get, and then you end up going down and now we have 2 victims. So hopefully everybody enjoyed this presentation. It covered some of the do's, the don'ts of confined spaces, define what it is, when it's a permit, when it's not a permit. And I'd like to thank you all for your attention and appreciate everything you guys have done by being here. Have a good day.